Thank you so much, Dex. Thanks for having me on. Sure appreciate it. Should I go ahead and share my screen here?
That would be great.
All right. Here we go. Is that working?
That looks
I'm
great.
going to. All right. Sounds good. All right. So this class is all about water intrusion. It's about how to figure out when a house has water leaking in and what you can do as a home inspector to positively identify it. Before I really go anywhere with this, though, I want to just share this because so often when I'm taking these classes, I like to take a lot of screen grabs. I like to capture the screen like, oh, that's a good slide. That's a good slide. I like having all this information. So if anybody wants this presentation, I've got the whole thing available for you in PDF format. All you got to do is go to this link. It's a short link. Steph is going to put this link in the chat so you can just copy and paste it. And you can download this whole presentation. The one that you're downloading might have a couple of slides that are slightly different. I change these every time I give this presentation. So it might not be 100% the same, but it's 99% the same. So if you want this whole class, go here, you can have it. And if anybody misses it, feel free to put it in the chat and Steph will be happy to give you that full link. So wanted to start off with that. So talking about what we're going to be covering today, by the time you're done with this class, I want you to be able to find problematic areas on a house from a distance without ever having to go up to the house and poke and prod and peel back siding and all that. I want you to be able to look at a picture of a house and say, ooh, that's a problem area. You're not positively identifying this as a problem area, but you know where to look for them. You know where to focus your energy. That's step number one. Number two, I want you to be able to push, probe, and use a moisture meter to help positively identify water intrusion problems at outside walls. That's really the focus of this. And then number three is to understand what an intrusive moisture inspection is all about. Sometimes we don't have the ability to positively identify water intrusion, and you got to punt. You got to kick it off to somebody else. Now, as a home inspector, that's something that I hate doing. The fewer recommendations that I can make for further evaluation by a qualified blah, 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 blah. I hate making those. I'm getting paid to do the inspection. I don't want to be punting constantly, but sometimes we have to. And if you got to punt, I want you to be able to know who you're going to recommend and what their services are going to look like. So instead of just telling your client, I don't know, find someone who can figure this out, you can say, you need to find someone with this certification. Here's what they're going to do. Here's what the report's going to look like. Here's what's going to be done to the house. You have a very clear objective or a very clear understanding of what intrusive moisture testing is going to look like. That's the third objective today. Now, let me warn you by saying I'm going to cover a lot of stuff that exceeds home inspection standards of practice. Now, I know we've got home inspectors from all over the country here. I don't know what your rules are state to state about what you can do and can't do. And I've only got one set of standards on the screen here. I'm an ASHI member. There's probably a heck of a lot more InterNASHI members on this call just because those are the numbers. But the standards aren't that different. They're very similar. I'm going to cover a couple of things in the ASHI standard of practice when it comes to home inspections. As a home inspector, we are covering stuff that is visually observable. If you can't see it, you don't need a report on it. That is our standard. That is the minimum standard for a home inspection. InterNASHI standards, very similar. However, the standard of practice is not intended to stop you from doing more than the minimum. That's what this section says. It says the standard is not intended to limit the inspector from including other services in addition to those things that are required. So you can always do more. Remember, your home inspection standard of practice is a floor. It is not a ceiling. It's the worst job that you should be doing for your client is following your SOP to a T. And I'm not going to get into details on that. Just that is my strong and hard opinion. And then what do our standards of practice tell us about inspecting the exterior? How are we supposed to do it? Our standards don't tell us how to do it. Our standards say, for instance, on the exterior, we shall inspect the wall coverings, flashing, and trim. Well, how do we do it? Do we use a moisture meter? Do we peel back siding? What is this supposed to entail? Doesn't give us any direction, just says you shall inspect it. That's it. So the standards are vague about exactly how we're supposed to do our job. We need to fill in all the gaps. And finally, our standard says that we're not required to identify and report on concealed conditions, latent defects, stuff that you can't see. You are protected by your standard of practice. You don't have to report on all this stuff. So if you want to just do the basics, follow your SOP, not do anything extra, you can. That is your option. You're not a bad home inspector. You're not being negligent, any of that. But I am going to cover a lot of stuff that would exceed the SOP. It's going above and beyond. So, and you know what? I'm going to skip that next slide just for time's sake. Just trust me when I say we're going to be doing a lot of stuff that exceeds the SOP today. And it's okay if you don't want to. Nobody has to do any of this stuff. I want to make that really clear. So starting off, I said one of these superpowers I want to be able to give you is to look at a house from a distance and know where that house is going to fail, know where you're going to end up with water intrusion. And it all starts at the top. We're thinking about roof lines. We're thinking about where all the water comes down and where it all ends up. That's where your home inspection ought to start. And you can do this by looking at photos of a house before you ever show up. Now, here's some old roof designs. Roofs will fall, at least I'm in Minnesota, and most of our roofs fall under two basic designs. It's usually either a gable roof or a hip roof. Now, it's not as simple as these diagrams show. They get a little bit more complicated, but it's essentially one of these two designs. There's a whole bunch of other ones out there, but let's look through a few examples here. Now, here, this would be our basic hip roof. This is an older home, I'd say maybe 1950s, and this is a really nice design. As the water comes down, you've got fairly large overhangs around the entire house. So these walls usually never end up seeing any water. You've got to have a really wind-driven rain before any water is going to touch any of these windows or outside walls. So this is beautiful design. Love this house. It's probably never going to experience water intrusion. And these overhangs really make a big difference when it comes to water intrusion. The National Research Council of Canada found that the bigger the overhang, the less the potential for water intrusion. I mean, no duh, right? We all kind of intuitively should know this as home inspectors, but here's our thought on that quantified. They say that, and if you have no overhang, 90% of those homes are going to have water intrusion problems. And then as the overhang gets larger and larger, we're going to have fewer and fewer homes with water intrusion problems. Step up to a 2-foot overhang, and the number of homes with water intrusion problems goes down to less than 25%. And I'm sure that we could extrapolate these numbers and say, all right, if you got a 3-foot overhang, that number is going to keep going down. This is exactly what I've found to be very true in all my years of doing water intrusion inspections. Great article here. This talking about the importance of overhangs, even if you have a gable roof. It's not like it's impossible to have overhangs. Now, when was the last time you saw an overhang like this on a gable? I've never seen one. I saw it in this magazine. That's the only one I've ever seen, but great idea. And it's the point here is that you can still have overhangs even if you got a gable roof. All right, we're back into hip roofs. Let's take a look at this house and think through where we might be concerned about water intrusion. For the most part, I'm not. Most of these walls are pretty well covered. As I think about where the water goes, you're going to have some water coming down this valley. It's going to come down here in a concentrated area. It might splash a little bit on this lower roof. I might have a little bit of concern about splashing here, but for the most part, the water is really well managed. And I don't see anywhere where water is really going to be hitting an outside wall. So this looks really nice. Now, let's look at the opposite of that. This is a house that I did not inspect. Almost every photo you see here, every video, it's something that I shot. I did not shoot this one. I think to get this image, I did a Google search for very stupid roof designs. And this might have been the first thing that came up. No, seriously, I don't know where this came from, but there's about 1 million places on here where this house could experience water intrusion problems. And we call this CBS, complicated building syndrome. You've got water coming down. It's going to hit the back of this turret. It's going to wrap around the side of this turret. It's going to come down, and then it's going to come right into the side of a window. does the same thing around the other side. Water's got nowhere to go but into a window. We've got a bunch of water coming down these valleys. It's going to splash on a flat roof here. I mean, everywhere we look, we've got water funneled into the side of the house. This is bad news. I would hate to be inspecting this house. I feel like I'd spend 3 hours just inspecting the exterior. Now, here's something a little bit more realistic. This is a townhome that was going up in my area, and I just took a screen grab of a diagram of what it was going to look like, just for discussion points. Let's think about the water for one area. If we go from peak to peak and we go to this back section of roof, all of this water, we kind of got just a funnel where all of this water gets concentrated. It's all going to come right down here. It's going to come down here and it's going to hit this lower roof. It's going to splash against the siding. If this does have wood siding, which is kind of what I think of when I see these dark colors, they usually don't put vinyl. They usually don't use these dark colors with vinyl. If this does have wood siding, I'd be concerned about a lot of water splashing right here. And then where does the water go after it hits the ground? How does the water make its way out to the street? These are all things that I want to think about. Now, getting out to the street, we're getting a little bit sidetracked. My focus is really on water intrusion on the outside walls. But while we're at it, take a little bit of time to think about it, especially if you're going to have a basement here. How's all that water going to go away so you don't end up with wet basement issues? And then where else is water going to hit the walls? Let's keep looking at this here. We've got this window. It's pretty well exposed. You've got this tiny little gable looking thing, maybe giving it a tiny bit of protection. It sticks out just a little bit. I think this window is going to get wet just about every time it rains. So as a home inspector, I'm concerned about water intrusion at this window, but these windows, even more so. There's basically no protection for these windows. So I'm going to pay more attention to those. I'm thinking about how much water is going to hit them. We'll look at more designs in a minute. But let's keep focusing on designs. You know, the biggest thing that I've been seeing with homes in the last 20 to 30 years is something that I like to call gable-itis. And it's where they put on all these extra gables on houses just to make it look more aesthetically appealing. They put all these extra triangles on there and they don't do anything for the performance of the house. In fact, quite the opposite. They funnel water into small little areas. It's impossible to vent these areas right. I mean, don't get me started on roof ventilation and how you can't vent a valley. And then how do you insulate it and where are all the thermal boundaries? I mean, it's a nightmare trying to get all these details right, but they do it constantly. And our focus here is on water intrusion. So where does all that water go? It all gets funneled into a small amount of area from this peak all the way over to this peak. All of that water ends up in a small area. Now, I don't see any areas where it's really going to hit the walls, but for basement water intrusion, it looks like it all goes down to one downspout. That thing is going to be overloaded. That is a tiny little gutter for a big section of roof. So that'd be something I'm thinking about. Let's look at this next house. Now, we've got a window that is fairly well protected. You've got all the water from this peak to this peak coming down into a single line, but it's going to shoot past the window. I like seeing that. You've got this window has a little eyebrow roof. That's protected. This one's protected. Now, that middle window, I'd be a little bit more concerned about this. This window is going to see a lot of water. I would surely get up on the roof and do a little poking and prodding and scanning with my moisture meter to make sure we haven't had any water intrusion at this window. That's where I'm focusing my efforts. And by the way, while we're at it, let's look at the neighbor's house. Let's just take a look over. Where's all their water going? We got a huge valley coming right down and it deposits right next to the front door. And man, you're going to chuckle as you start looking for it. You're going to start noticing that all these houses with all these extra gables built in the last 20 to 30 years, they all do that. They take all of the water at the front of the house, they take a funnel and they put it right by the front door. That's always where it ends up. If you're going to be looking for basement water intrusion problems, look around the front door. I mean, no, I'm exaggerating. Look where water is concentrated at the outside, but that's almost always going to be right by the front door. That's just how it's being done. It's almost like a contest now to see how many gables builders can put on homes. This one, we've got 7 gables or 6. We got 6 there. This house had 7 gables. I think the record we're up to now is 10. This was not in the United States. Another inspector was out vacationing, and he shared this photo with me. But it goes on and on. If you find more, please share the photo with me, and I'd love to include it in my next presentation. And this is another example of complicated building syndrome. I did not inspect this house. Another inspector, Scott shared this with me. I would not enjoy having to inspect this, thinking about all these different roof lines, all these areas where water is concentrated, all these areas where I need to focus my efforts. But there's a lot of areas I'd be thinking about. I mean, look at all this, from this peak to this peak, all of this right in here gets concentrated into one tiny little area. And I see we got a gutter, but is it going to work? Is all of the water going to get funneled into that gutter just the way it should? That's where we got to take the micro view, the close-up view. Right now, we're still focusing on macro, looking at the big picture. Where does water get funneled? Where do we need to focus our efforts? But let's step up. Let's take a closer look at some of these houses. Now, here's a house where I looked at photos before I even went to do the inspection on this house, and I went, ooh, I know where I'm focusing my efforts. It's my efforts. It's right where this valley terminates at a wall. I'm concerned about that. So as soon as I get on the roof, I'm poking, I'm prodding, I'm focusing my efforts there. There really wasn't anything I could see. And, you know, even if water does leak in here, you're probably not going to see much evidence up above. Usually you're going to see evidence inside. And it's not going to be on the other side of the wall, because if we think about the wall sandwich, you're going to have vinyl siding, you're going to have some type of weather resistant barrier. Maybe it's going to be Tyvek, and they're going to have the sheathing. And if water's leaking in, it's going to hit those outside materials, and it's going to run straight down the wall. It's not going to make its way to the insulation and then the drywall. So I'm surely not going to see signs of any water intrusion inside the house in the finished spaces. Where I might see it, if I've got an unfinished basement, I'm going to go down to the basement and I'm going to look at the rim area. That is a great way to look for water intrusion at the roof, is looking down in the basement. Or if there's a crawl space, I'd look at the rim area in the crawl space. Now at this particular home, they did have an unfinished basement there, and they had spray foam insulation, which, you know, it's pretty tough to see behind that stuff, but this wall had been leaking for long enough that it had actually stained the wood behind the insulation. You could see enough of that staining coming through to say, ooh, we definitely have a problem. All this blackness is coming from a leak all the way up at the roof. So the rim space is a great place to look for signs of water intrusion at the roof. Now here's another roof wall intersection. It's just a bad detail. We've got a valley dying into the backside of a wall, and then you got moss growing onto here. Your home inspector spidey senses should be going crazy when you see stuff like this. Here's another home. These photos I did not take. This is thanks to James Corello with JRV Home Inspections out in Connecticut. Thank you, James. He shared this one where you've got all these different roof surfaces converging into one small area. It comes down, we got a big valley dumping into one area. And then to top it off, you've got a downspout dumping all of its water right here. And if we round the corner, look what's going on. All that water comes right down the wall. And then it's supposed to be going into the gutter. Of course, we know what it's supposed to do, but what's going to happen in reality? Some of the water will make its way into the gutter. Some of the water is going to overflow that gutter. We got these gutter screens, the gutter screens. Those gutter screens never work great. And I'm not crazy about the gutter screen that's there either. Those are some very restrictive covers on there. So a lot of water is going to end up hitting the wall. And what happens? We get water leaking in. This is one of those things you should be able to see this from a distance as a home inspector and go, ooh, I know where I'm going to focus my efforts. And then look at this carefully. Do you see what's going on here? It's patched. Oops. It's patched in here. We've got different pieces of siding. These don't match. Someone has already opened up this wall, and it's surely a hot mess inside there. But we don't know that. We can just suspect it. But let's look down in the basement. This is what he found. You've got tons of water that's been leaking in here. He pulled the insulation back. Now, I know home inspection standards of practice don't require us to disturb insulation. But if you were buying this house, would you go ahead and reach up in that rim space and pull the insulation back? If your sister was buying it, if a family member was buying this, would you do that for them? Well, yes, of course you would. And that's what you ought to be doing for your clients. I don't care what the home inspection standard of practice says. If you can move some insulation and put it back when you're done, please do it. What's not too loud here? I've got a neighbor doing yard landscaping and now somebody's using a leaf blower. I apologize. There's nothing I can do about that. All right. Looking at more roof lines, more water management. We've got a bunch of water coming down this valley, and never mind the missing shingles. I'm not here to talk about roof coverings. We got a bunch of water coming down this valley. I think they changed this property. I think they used to have all the water wrapping around the side, coming down this wall. And I found signs of water intrusion here. It looked really old, looked like some old staining. I think they changed this roof line and they brought this valley out to help direct that water away from the wall. And today, I don't have any concerns. I think it looks good today. No problems there. Well, let's look at another good detail. Here's a newer construction home I inspected. We've got a full system of gutters and downspouts. We've got a big downspout here taking a lot of roof water. Ordinarily, that water would come down the roof surface and it would shoot right against this window, something I'd be very concerned about. But the builder has surely dealt with problems like that before. And they added this little triangle onto the roof, this big diverter to direct all this water out away from the window. Oh, this warms my heart. That is just a fantastic detail. And as home inspectors, there's nothing wrong with pointing out these good details to your clients either. Let them know when someone went out of their way to help prevent water intrusion and damage to a wall. So this looks great. Gives me the warm fuzzies. All right, back to bad. Do you see what's going on here? Think this one through before I mark it up. Where's all the water going? I'll give you a minute to think. You got the upper roof. All that water comes down. It hits the lower roof and right up against the house. So where's water going to be leaking in? Right here in this area where I circled with yellow. Where does the water go? It goes straight down inside the wall. Where do we find signs of that water intrusion? If there's an unfinished basement or a crawl space, we head down there, we look at that same area. And thankfully there was an unfinished basement. I was able to get at it. This house is only 2 or 3 years old. And already we've got a bunch of staining at the subfloor. That's evidence of water leaking in right above. There was no signs of any actual damage yet. It was just staining. So my advice when you see stuff like this is to report that you have a lot of water concentrated into one area. Report on what you saw. You can say there was signs of water intrusion, there was staining in the basement. And then a good phrase that I always use when I see conditions like this. This is one you may want to write down. I don't actually have it on the screen in any of my slides, but say that you've got the potential for concealed damage. Potential concealed damage. Those 3 words. I love that phrase. I use that a lot when I see stuff like this, because something we're supposed to do, something I always try to do is you report what the condition is, why it matters, and what to do about it. And so we're satisfying the why it matters part. You got the potential for concealed damage with these conditions. All right, moving on. Let's just power through a few more roofs because, like I said, that's like a third of this class. Is I want you to be able to look at roofs, look at wall lines, look at construction, and know where you're going to focus your efforts. So let's just power through a few more. We've got all of the water on this upper section of roof draining onto the lower roof, comes right down here. It might hit that outside window. I'd also be concerned about basement water intrusion right in this area here. Ton of water is concentrated there. Here's another one. We've got all of the rainwater from all of this area concentrated into one area. Now, I don't really see it hitting walls, but it does go into one single downspout, and then it drains into a tiny little patch of dirt that they put there. Good luck. Good luck. Now, I'm concerned about basement water intrusion right at that area, right by the front door, like I said. Here's another one where I'm concerned about basement water intrusion here. We got a large area of water that's concentrated into a small area. And as far as outside walls, there's a lot of exposure. I mean, we've got these windows exposed. These windows are exposed. Everything's exposed. There's hardly any overhang protection. So there's a lot of areas where I'd be focusing my efforts on exterior water intrusion. Now on this one, we've got water is going to be coming down in two fairly concentrated areas. One is where all these two valleys converge. It's going to come right down here. Another, we get all of this roof area drains onto the lower roof, and from there it comes down again to a valley, and then we've got a concentrated area of water right here. For this house, I'd say about 2/3 of the roof surface get drained into a single small area. It's got the potential to hit the wall and hit a window. I'd be focused on these areas. On this home, basically we've got a big U shape and it all funnels into a small area. And here we have it again, almost the entire front of the house gets concentrated into a small area. So I think I made my point. Think about where all of the water goes. Imagine what the roof runoff is going to look like when it's pouring rain outside. Now, here's a good example of that. This was a home where I had done a pre-drywall inspection on a new construction build. And I told the home buyers, look, you've got like this big U shape at the front of the house. All this water is going to get concentrated in one small area. I think it might actually even hit the house when it rains. And I think you ought to do something about this. I mean, you're not going to be changing any of the roof lines. We're way past that. Don't suggest that. You're going to look like a foolish home inspector. You start suggesting stuff like that. But you can at least talk to them about putting gutters on to help lower the potential for water intrusion. And they said, well, the builder's not going to do that. Okay, fine. The builder doesn't have to do it. You can do it. You can invest the money to help prevent your walls from rotting out and having all kinds of moisture problems. And, you know, they kind of went, this home inspector is a little overzealous. He's a little picky. We're not putting gutters on. And then I ended up coming back to do the final inspection on a day when it was raining. And this is what it looked like. And hopefully my video is not going to be too choppy. It's always kind of a crapshoot when we're doing this, when I'm sharing my screen, but hopefully this works. Watch where this water's going. Isn't that a great detail? You've got water just absolutely pounding the house. And this is a brand new home. How long is it going to be before you've got water intrusion problems, before water is leaking in behind the siding, behind that stone veneer? How long is it going to be? I think there was probably water getting in at the time of my inspection. I did everything in my power to try to prove that this is actually leaking today or find some type of evidence that it was leaking. Couldn't find that. So had to make kind of a softer recommendation instead of saying, this is wrong, you need to get gutters on. I had to say, there's a lot of water concentrated into one area, which increases the potential for water intrusion. To help lower the potential for water intrusion, I suggest putting a full system of gutters and downspouts on the house. You know, it's not a super strong recommendation, but it's the strongest one that I was comfortable making without actually seeing signs of water intrusion. And it's too new for me to actually recommend water intrusion testing. That's something that ought not be done until a house is 1 year old or older. All right. So, neighbors more. Now we got more power equipment. Hope you can't hear it. I'm just crossing my fingers. Okay. So what happens when you do end up with water intrusion? What happens to the walls? What's going on underneath the siding? Something I'll tell you is that just about all types of wall coverings are very good at hiding water intrusion problems. And we're talking stucco, stone veneer, vinyl, EIFS. Yeah, I said EIFS, not EIFS. It's EIFS. And aluminum, wood siding. All of these things do a great job of hiding water intrusion problems. So often people say, well, the siding looks good. Who cares? The siding will always look good. You can have sheathing that's completely gone behind the siding, and the siding is not going to tell you a thing about it. So don't expect to be able to identify rotted sheathing, concealed damage by looking at a wall. You can't. Now, the one exception might be what's that stuff? Fiberboard, basically. Oh gosh, I'm having a brain fart. I'll come back to it. But let's just leave it at it's tough to find water intrusion at walls. But what does it look like? Here's some examples of water intrusion on stucco homes that really didn't show any signs of water intrusion. We've got sheathing that's just rotted away to just about nothing here. We've got windows that were leaking like crazy, and you can see that the sheathing is just toast. More concealed damage. These are all stucco homes built in the mid 90s through mid 2000s. More stucco damage, more stucco damage. Now, here's a house where we did the home inspection and we were concerned about water intrusion. It's a stucco clad house. They had caulked everything really nicely. The stucco was all in very nice shape. Didn't really see any telltale signs that there was water leaking in, but we were just concerned about this house based on the exposure to the elements, based on the amount of based on the fact that there was no overhangs and the age of the stucco. We find a lot of problems with stucco homes, and we ended up recommending water and intrusive moisture testing on this house. And our company ended up doing the intrusive testing. We do a lot of intrusive testing at my company. And I want to show you a few examples of what we found, because we found water and they ended up having to do remediation on this house. They had to bring out the scaffolding and start tearing off all the stucco. Here's what it looked like behind the stucco, which really looked nice. The sheathing was gone. And I mean, gone. There was just about nothing left in a lot of areas. They even had plywood in some areas. Around those curved sections, they ended up using plywood sheathing. And this is all on a house where we could have just said, hey, it all looks pristine. But I'll tell you, we find so many problems on these stucco clad homes with exposed areas that it's just an automatic recommendation for us that you have intrusive moisture testing done if you've got a house built in the 90s or 2000s and you've got stucco or stone veneer. It's pretty much automatic for us. And now I'll take a quick pause. I see a question here. It says, how much do you also factor in the location of the house and the climates in those locations? Now, I would factor that in a ton. You need to know your own climate. Here in the Twin Cities, here in Minnesota, we get a lot of rain and we've got a huge change in climates. I mean, we've got -20 up to 100 degrees outside. We get big swings, and this takes a toll on our houses. And I think it really helps with water intrusion. It's probably a really bad climate. You go out to California, somewhere where it's a lot, you get far less rainfall. I don't think they have nearly the same level of problems with water intrusion that we do here in Minnesota. So it definitely makes a big difference where you're located. You need to know your local area. And if you're a newer inspector, definitely talk with other home inspectors in your area to try to get a better idea of how much you need to be concerned about these things. And same person said they're here in Alberta. I know nothing about the climate in Alberta. I'm sorry. I wish I could speak to local climates, but I know zero about that. Sorry. All right. Moving on. So we're done looking at roof lines and focusing on thinking about where we need to focus our efforts. Next, let's talk about kickout flashings. If you're a home inspector, you surely know what kickout flashing is, but just in case it's your first day, it's this little bent up piece of metal that goes at a roof wall intersection. Anywhere a roof ends at a wall, you ought to have kickout flashing. Now, I'm not saying you must, I'm not saying you should, because then I might be implying that it was required by code at the time that this was all put together. I'm not saying it's wrong if you don't. I'm saying it's a best practice. It's a good idea. Now, maybe in your area, if you know your codes, maybe you'd want to get into defining whether it should have been installed or it shouldn't have been. But I find that's kind of a boring conversation. It's a pointless conversation. I'm not there to tell someone what should have been done when it was put together or not. I'm more there to say, what do we have today? And what is best practice, and what is the potential consequence of doing it this way? Okay, you don't have kickout flashings. The roof was installed 15 years ago, kickout flashings were not required in your area. Wonderful. But why are kickout flashings in the national code today? It's to reduce the potential for water intrusion. And we found they make a big difference. So anytime I'm inspecting a house and we don't have kickout flashing at a roof wall intersection, that's the type of language I put in my report. I say there's no kickout flashing installed at this location. Kickout flashing lowers the potential for water intrusion, and I suggest you have it added, or some version of that. Or if it's a tiny little area and it looks like it's got a big old overhang, I may soften my recommendation. I may say there's no kickout flashing. It reduces the potential for water intrusion. Next time the roof covering is replaced, be sure you add it. I may not make a recommendation to have a contractor out there today to make this change. I need to temper my recommendations with reality. Not everything has to be fixed. Here's what kickout flashing looks like in the real world when it's installed. This is one that I actually installed at my neighbor's house. I should have taken pictures before I installed it. I'll show you what happened at the house because there was no kickout flashing. We'll come back to that when we're talking about vinyl siding. But sometimes you'll see people caulk this intersection where you really should have kickout flashing. Caulk is not a substitute for flashing. That people get the idea that, okay, this is a problematic area and we don't want water leaking in, and I don't know how to do kickout flashing because is it the roofer's job or is it the sider's job? And they like to point their fingers at each other and say it's their job. So what are you supposed to do? So the handy homeowner goes in there with a tube of caulk and they decide to caulk it instead. Well, think through what you're doing. The kickout flashing is there to direct water out that has made its way underneath the shingles and underneath the siding, and it's running down that step flashing the whole way. Now the kickout flashing directs that water out. Now, if you caulk it, what are you doing? You're caulking your drain shut. You should never have caulking in place of kickout flashing. Better you have nothing there at all than caulking. So that's bad news. And something I used to do when I was trained in, I followed another home inspector who uses all for everything. He'd be poking and prodding and he'd poke everything with it. So when I first started inspecting, I'd poke everything with my awl until we'd start to get complaints that we're putting holes in the walls. And, I realized I don't need to be using my awl to poke holes to take pictures to show that something is rotted. You can just as easily take your finger and press very lightly and not make holes in the siding that people are going to call and complain about. So please learn from my mistakes. Don't do what I'm showing you in this photo here. This is an old photo. I would never do this again today after having dealt with complaints about it. And yeah, I get it. The siding's already rotted. I'm not the one who caused damage, but good luck explaining that to an angry seller. Yeah. So that's my advice there. Don't put holes in people's houses. Again, missing kickout flashing here. I'm pressing lightly with my finger on the siding to demonstrate that the wall is toast. If I can do this to the siding, if the siding is at this point where I can just push it right in, we've had a lot of water coming in. You're seeing tip of the iceberg right here. There's way more damage going on, and it's going to come down the wall like this in this big cone of destruction. Now, just for fun, here's a few other flashing details, things that are not kickout flashing. Look how high this goes. This might be a 1/2 inch high, and then they didn't know how to get it to go in the gutter. So they took a little section of downspout and they cut it up and they kind of glued or siliconed it to the vinyl siding. You have to be smiling. You have to appreciate this. This is not kickout flashing. This is a bent piece of metal, and this is what it looks like underneath. This does nothing. Water is going to run right underneath it. It's not even lapped the right way. And kickout flashing never actually has to be cut. I'll show you in a quick little video what it could look like. This location could have used kickout flashing. Now, there are these pre-made kickout flashings you can buy where it's got this big scoop. I'm sure these work really well. I've heard these promoted by some industry professionals who talk about water intrusion. I've never actually seen one myself, never seen one in the field. I've only seen pictures of them. Really what I usually end up seeing is pre-made kickout flash, and you can buy them for, well, I don't know, this photo is kind of old. This is like 10 years old. It's probably twice the price today, but you can buy these pre-made kickout flashings, or you can actually just make your own. Now, I know we're getting into the weeds on this here, but I'm going to show you an old video I made showing how you make kickout flashing without having to cut it. All we do is you take a pliers and you make a little bend in it and you push it together. And this is a simple piece of step flashing. You scrunch it, and now there's my kickout flashing. If I really want to make it look nice, I can throw it in a bench vise, I can flatten it, and boom, there's kickout flashing without having to use snippers, make a cut in it that's going to leak. That's what anybody ought to be doing. Just a few more fun flashing details. I hope you appreciate these. This is roofing tar, and this is great stuff, or expanding foam behind it. And so this is flashing on the outside of a wall instead of behind the stucco and the shingles. This is not flashing. This is coil stock, aluminum coil stock, wrapped around the chimney to give the appearance of counter flashing. But if it were real counter flashing, it would have been cut into the side of the chimney. From the ground, it looked like counter flashing. I thought, ooh, they did a really nice job with the chimney, until I got on the roof and saw it does nothing. They had surely seen it done right at other homes and didn't know what was supposed to be done. Here's more great stuff, more expanding foam being used in place of flashing. Bad news. Here's a house I showed you earlier when we were looking at all those photos of roofs where water was concentrated into small areas. We've got all this water concentrated into a tiny area. It comes right down here. It splashes against the roof. And then we take a close-up view of this window and look at the flashing. They cut the flashing too short. Water is going to splash like crazy. It's going to get up underneath here and it's going to go right underneath this flashing. Super, super nasty detail on a new construction home. So, I mean, already I'm focusing my efforts on this window. I don't normally get up this close and personal with every window on every home inspection, but when I see all the water concentrated right there, you bet I'm getting up close and personal. I'm looking at any little detail I can see to make sure that it looks really nice. And this one did not. All right, more flashing attempts. This is ice and water shield that they just ran up the side of the wall and did not make any attempt to flash. They just hoped that it would stick to the stucco. Same thing here. That we're missing a ton of flashing. Water's going to dump right down behind the flashing here. And here's one where we've got roll roofing and they just rolled it right up the wall and crossed their fingers and said, let's hope this works. Okay. That was just a little detour. Nothing educational about any of those photos. They're just fun to see. So my advice is get a moisture meter. If you're not already using a moisture meter and you want to have a better idea of water intrusion and you want to positively identify it, instead of simply saying, hey, there's a lot of water concentrated here, I think you could have a problem. I like to say, I found proof of a problem. I want to be more definitive in my reports. And it all comes down to using a moisture meter to figure out these areas. There's a ton of them on the market, and I'm kind of a moisture meter snob. I have tested a ton of them. I haven't tested all of them, but I've tested a lot of them. And there's two ways that moisture meters work. You've either got pin probes. A bunch of these moisture meters have pin probes, and that's where you stick the probes into a material that you're testing. Most of them give a reading in, they give you a wood moisture equivalent rating, where you poke the probes into something and they say, assuming you're putting this into wood, it's going to have this level of saturation. The really fancy ones are going to ask you which type of wood you're going to put it into, like the Delmhorst moisture check. There you program it for what type of wood you're using. For home inspection work, you don't need anything that specific. You can use one that you don't need to calibrate to the type of wood you're going into. But point is, you can have moisture probes. They take a reading of the actual moisture content. And the other way is going to be a scanning moisture meter. And that's where it sends out radio waves and it measures what gets reflected back. The denser the material you're scanning, the more you're going to be sent back. If you hold this up to your hand, it's going to give you 100% moisture. If you hold it up to a dry piece of drywall, it's going to give you a very low number. But the one thing to be aware of here is that these numbers are simply relative numbers. They're not actually telling you the moisture content of whatever it is that you're scanning. If I scan a wall and it goes up to 50% on my moisture meter, it would be completely wrong for me to say this wall has 50% moisture content. It's just a relative reading. The number just says 50. And the only thing that I care about as a home inspector is what number do I get if I move my moisture meter from this suspected wet area to a known dry area. I'm looking for the relative difference there. That's the only thing that matters. And I don't report these numbers in my home inspection reports. I say that my moisture meter indicated moisture at this area or indicated a high level of moisture in this area, but I don't report the exact numbers because this is not a exact science. We don't know exactly what those numbers mean. It's all about relativity. I'll tell you, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm hammering this point home, but we use our moisture meters around toilets too. That's standard procedure for every inspector in my company. Every toilet, after you've given it a couple flushes, you take your moisture meter and you scan around the floor. There's some tiled floors. We put a moisture meter on there and it says that the whole floor pegs our meter. Well, we can't scan those floors. It's useless. It's not that the whole floor is soaked. It's just too dense for us to get a reading. There's other floors where it works really well. And as we get close to the toilet, the moisture level goes up and up and up, and that indicates a problem. Now, if you're using your scanning moisture meter and you're finding no moisture, and all of a sudden it just pegs your meter, it goes super high, well, you might have a false positive. So if you hit metal or anything that's completely solid behind the surface you're scanning, it's going to give you a false positive. So I'm giving you a lot of warnings to say, don't start using a scanning moisture meter and reporting on stuff until you've used it a lot and you've had a good understanding of what it's telling you. I mean, maybe give it a few months of using it at every house, on every inspection, in every occasion that you can think of to use it on before you ever start using this to report on stuff. Because the last thing you want to do is have false positives or miss negatives when you should be finding them when your clients see you using it. So I've got a question in the chat here. It says, which moisture meter do I recommend? Thank you for asking. Great question. I am a super snob, like I said, when it comes to moisture meters. And my opinion is that Protimeter Survey Master is the best moisture meter for home inspectors. I even wrote a blog with that exact title. There it is on the screen. I wrote that back in 2015, and nothing has changed my mind since. I still think this is the best moisture meter for home inspectors. And that was the one right here. And the newer version of the Survey Master doesn't look like this. You can't buy this one anymore. They changed the look and it now looks like this, and it has the exact same functionality. It just doesn't slip into your tool belt nearly as well. So I really loved the old ones. I don't like the new ones, but that's what we're stuck with. They're expensive. They go for about $500, but they are super reliable. They have instantaneous feedback, which is something that's important to me. When I'm scanning a wall, if it's a vinyl house and I'm using the scan motor and I'm pulling it across the vinyl siding, I want instant feedback. I don't want to pull it across and have to stop and wait, see what the meter says, pull it across, wait, see what it says. It feels like you're using a mouse and there's a lag on your screen and you move the mouse and then you wait for your cursor to catch up. You can't do it. I mean, on paper, it sounds like, what are you complaining about, Reuben? This is nothing. I've got an extra 2 seconds, but when you're doing it all day, every day, it gets really obnoxious. So I love the instantaneous feedback of the Survey Master. The Tramex, if you're using a moisture meter that only does scanning, that's probably the best one out there, but I like a moisture meter that does both. And the Survey Master does both. It does pin probes and scans. Well, I'm not going to get into all of these here, but that's hands down my favorite. Another reason I like the Survey Master is that it's got a port where you can plug in external probes. You can use a hammer probe for doing moisture testing on stucco homes. You can also use deep wall probes. You can plug those into the side of the Survey Master and you can do some special little testing that I'm going to teach you about before the end of this class. So here's a little side-by-side comparison. Well, you know what? I'm going to skip over most of this. Here's the toilet. Here's what I was telling you about with the toilet. I'm slowly moving it over. And the part I want you to notice here with the Survey Master is that it has good visual indication. You see that light right here it moves from green to yellow to red. So I don't even need to read the numbers on here. I don't care what the numbers say. I'm just happy with that green, yellow, red. That's a great indication. Not only that, but it makes a ticking sound. It makes this chirping noise. And the more moisture that I'm scanning, the faster it chirps. So I can be scanning stuff behind my back. I don't even need to be looking at my moisture meter. And I know what it's telling me, and it's all instantaneous. So part of the reason I really like that one. Now, if you're looking for something on a budget, I will tell you there's another moisture meter out there that's good. It's not as good, but it's good. And it's the X-Tech MO55. We've got a handful of home inspectors on my team who use this as a backup. It's bigger, it's boxier, it doesn't fit in your tool pouch as well. It does not give you instantaneous feedback. The pin probes aren't nicely shaped. They've got these cones instead of kind of more pins. I don't like that as much, but I found it to be very accurate. I've done comparison testing with my Survey Master side by side, and the numbers are within 1 percentage point of each other. And when I'm doing scanning, here scanning through a piece of drywall to pick up a wet paper towel behind it, they both gave me 15 right on the nose. They both gave me the exact same number. And when I was scanning the drywall with nothing behind it, one gave me 9.8, the other gave me 10.2. I mean, that's identical. So it is pretty accurate. I was very happy with that one. And then there was yet another one that a couple of inspectors on my team have started using. They've had really good results with, is the AccuMaster Duo Pro Pin. AccuMaster Duo Pro Pin. I just texted one of the inspectors on my team right before I started this class. I don't have a picture of it, but those are more in the $100 range. I love the Survey Master still, but I'm telling you, there's some other ones that do a decent job. Now, let me turn up the volume and I can show you what I mean about the lag. That's high. I'm scanning. I know that there's a wet area behind this vinyl siding, and I'll tell you, even if you're scanning wet vinyl siding, it's not going to pick up any of that surface moisture. It's looking for saturated sheathing. It's looking for a big mass of moisture, not a little thin layer of water. That's not going to throw off your moisture meter. So these do a really good job of scanning through vinyl siding. It's one of the biggest things we do with our moisture meters. And you can read on the screen here right now, it says 5.9. And as I slide it across and I come to the area where it's wet, if you looked really carefully, you could see the number briefly jumped up to 22, but you really got to be staring at the screen. And I should have pulled it across slower to really appreciate that. Let's, you know what? I'm going into too much detail on moisture meters. If anybody has any questions on moisture meters, I'm happy to answer them. I can take a quick pause here. But one of the other questions, do we use infrared for a typical home inspection? The answer is yes. We always use infrared for home inspections, but we do not use infrared to ever try to identify exterior water intrusion. When it comes to water coming in on outside walls, that's not something we use infrared for because it's not reliable. And I'll come back to that. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then the other question was, what was the other one? The dual moisture meter I mentioned. It's the AccuMaster Duo Pro Pin and just AccuMaster. The full answer here I've got from my inspector said Calculated Industries 7445 AccuMaster Duo Pro Pin and Pinless Moisture Meter. Yeah. So it's a good one. Good one. Not great, but good. Okay. There's two more. So chimneys, moving on a little bit, look out for chimneys. A lot of these are problematic. When I talk about chimneys, I'm not talking about masonry chimneys. I'm talking about a wood chimney chase. You know, it was popular for a while to have masonry chimneys, and then we started moving over to metal chimneys. And then people thought these metal chimneys were really ugly. So they started making wood chases to kind of wrap around these metal chimneys and make it match the rest of the house, make it look a little bit more like a traditional chimney. But really, what do you have when you've got this wood chase, this wood chimney chase? Think about a house, think about a structure that has no overhangs on any of the walls and it has no gutters. Every which way water comes in, every which way the wind blows, these walls are going to get saturated every time. And this is going to be the first place that you end up with water intrusion. So I pay a lot of attention to any of these wood chase chimneys. And you remember I told you earlier that all types of siding are very good at hiding water intrusion problems. Well, if you see water intrusion at an outside wall like this, where you've got the wood siding and you can see that the wood siding is damaged, you're seeing the tip of the iceberg. There's a heck of a lot more going on behind it. Let's take a little closer look at this. That is wood siding. And the sheathing behind it is gone. And it's gone way down that chimney. Here's another example. There's a hole just about the size of a baseball. Oh, and look at that. They caulked where they should have used kickout flashing. Who would have thought this could be a problem? Here's another one where it's basically the paint holding everything together. The siding is gone and there's a lot of damage at the sheathing. Here's one where you know what? I shouldn't have pushed my finger through all the way. Based on that flashlight, I know that this is over 10 years ago. I would never do that again today. I would just push much more lightly. Who cares that there's already a baseball size hole here? I'm not going to make anything worse. As a home inspector, I don't want to get any complaints about making stuff worse. And then here's looking underneath. We're looking at the bottom of a wood chase on a chimney, wood chimney chase. And when you start to see all this white stuff, that's advanced decay, advanced rotting. This whole chimney chase had to be redone from the top to the bottom. The sheathing was toast. So pay attention to those wood chimney chases. Pay attention to splashing water. That's another big area where you want to focus. Think about where water comes down and hits hard surfaces, and if that's going to come back and it's going to splash against the house. If it does, you need to take a pause and you need to focus some of your efforts there. At this particular home, you could see the clear drip line. I mean, it doesn't need to be raining for you to know where the water ends up. And then get down on your hands and knees. How is all of this flash? What does it look like? Well, this is really tight to the deck. I mean, typically you're going to have a bigger gap here. It's going to be higher up. You're going to be able to see these details a little better. This was really tight. So what do? We went down in the basement. What do we see? We see this. Now, your home inspector spidey senses should be going nuts at this point. We've got all this insect frass and all that other stuff. Now, we could stop here and we could say, have it further inspected by a qualified blah, blah, blah. There's signs of water intrusion, potential for concealed damage. But what I tell you earlier about moving insulation, move the insulation. So that's what we did. Grab the insulation, pull it back to find this whole bunch of insect damage. And these are carpenter ants. We don't have termites here in Minnesota. I've heard some pest guys say we do, but I'll believe it when I believe it. I've never seen a termite in my life. These are carpenter ants, but they only attack wood that is soft and rotted. And that happens when you got all that water concentrated into one small area. Let's look at another one. We got all this water coming down. I didn't take a picture of the whole house, but you've got water coming down, hitting this lower roof. And from there it comes down and it splashes against the house right here. Tons of splashing. How do we know there's a problem? Well, these little trees growing out of the wall are a really good indication that we've got a water problem here. You shouldn't have trees growing out of your wall. That area gets a lot of water. So my recommendation to the buyer was have the wall opened up. You got a high potential for concealed damage. I used my moisture meter. I scanned it, showed the wall was wet. And this is one of the few cases where someone actually did follow up my recommendation. They had that contractor come out and open the wall up, and they sent me photos. Nobody ever sends me photos of anything, but this person did. And here's what the walls look like. Tons of moisture damage, and it carried on for quite a ways. So gutters, I'm a huge fan of gutters. Gutters would prevent a lot of this damage. I mean, just on this last house, simply having a gutter here surely would have stopped all of this damage. And then one of the complaints that we get from builders is that gutters cause more damage than they create. And I'll say, not usually. I mean, you can have people who mess up gutters. If you have downspouts that are undersized, draining into too small of an area, you do have the potential to concentrate a lot of water and have water intrusion problems. This is one of my favorite examples of that, which is where I had a neighbor who had big area of roof coming into a small section of downspout. And then they took their downspout and they condensed it down even further. They got one of those little corrugated thingies that people like to use for their sump pumps on the outside of the house. And they had it funneled into one of those corrugated things. So the water was backed up all the way to the roof, and it was overflowing the gutter, and every seam was just pouring water out. And then there's a little screw hole down at the bottom of the gutter, and there's water shooting out. There's so much pressure. There's water shooting out like 8 feet into the yard from this tiny little hole because there's so much pressure, and every seam, every joint is just backing up like crazy. So if you have something like this, I can understand a builder complaining that gutters cause more problems than they create, but this is the exception. And then it's not that big of a deal to fix this. The next neighbor who moved in fixed the bottom of this. He didn't have this stupid little corrugated thing at the bottom. He ended up putting in an underground system with, believe it or not, 4-inch PVC. I know you're saying that's got to be 3-inch. No, I promise you, it was really 4-inch PVC going underground, going all the way out to the backyard, taking it out to the bottom of a hill. That's a beautiful way of handling it. That's a nice way to do it. Another thing you might hear in cold climates is that gutters cause ice dams. Now, for any of you in the South, I'm not even going to explain what an ice dam is. If you're in the North, you know what they are. Now, I'll tell you, gutters do not cause ice dams. Ice dams occur in the same place that gutters are installed. And then people make this big jump in logic and they say, therefore, the gutter caused the ice dam. It's not true. Take a look at this house. You see this big 8-inch thick ice dam? There are no gutters at this house. The ice dams just form in the same place. Here's what it looks like. If you've got a house with no gutters, an ice dam is going to form right at the exterior wall line. That's where it first starts, and the ice is going to carry straight out. Now, if you've got a gutter, the ice is going to keep carrying straight out, and you've got this big shelf for ice to build up on top of, and you're going to have a much larger mass of ice. You're going to have a much larger ice dam if you have gutters, but the ice dam is not going to climb up the roof anymore. The ice dam is still going to be right where the ice dam was with no gutters, right at the middle of the exterior wall line. And, this is just an example. Sometimes they're higher, sometimes they're lower, but the height has nothing to do with where the gutter is. So if you hear people complaining about this, saying gutters cause ice dams, it's not true. They don't. All right, so let's get into using some of our tools that we picked up now. We've got our moisture meter. We're doing an inspection on a house. It's got wood siding. We know where to focus our efforts. I'm not going around and pushing and prodding at every area of the house. I'm focusing my efforts on the areas that are going to fail first. So let's take a look. Here's a wood chase chimney. I walk up to it and I start just by pushing on it. I'm not even using my moisture meter yet. This is something I love doing with wood siding, is go to the areas I'm concerned about and give it a push, maybe with my fingers. If I think the siding is rotted, I won't use my fingers. I'll just use my palm so I don't push my finger through the siding. And if the siding has give, if it goes back, it means that the sheathing behind the siding is rotted. It means we've got a problem. So I do a lot of pushing on wood siding. Now here, a little younger, making a mistake. I should not be pushing my finger through the siding. Should have been using my palm there. Again, push on that siding. If it breaks that caulk seal and the siding goes in, we've got a problem. Here's another example of it, just a quick little video. This is a wood chimney chase. And as I push, I mean, the white and the green colors here should be just telltale signs for you. We've got a problem. But as I go around and I push on it, there's a lot of give. There should not be any of that give. And this was an inspection I was doing for the seller. And he told me, oh, shoot, okay, I've got to finish that chimney. I already replaced the siding and all the sheathing on 2 sides of it. Guess it's time to do the other 2 sides. Yep, that's correct. Here's another one where this was a gable end wall, and there was just one window that didn't have any protection. Normally, I'm not going to get up on my ladder and lean it up against the side of the house and check some 2nd-story window because I'm concerned about it, but I did. I was concerned about it. There was so much exposure and it just didn't look good from the ground. I said, I need to get up there. So went up there, started pushing around on the wood delicately, try not to leave holes in the wood, but there was a lot of give. This is super spongy, even broke the surface a little bit there. And then I went to the other side of the wood. I'm doing the same type of pushing, just pushing lightly. Don't want to push my fist through. And this, again, this is one of those things that you could easily miss this from the ground if you're not thinking this through and paying special attention to these areas. And then I also use my moisture meter. Now, I'm going to pause it in a few areas. Look at this. It's saying 62 and the range is 0 to 100. And my light is red. This is the very wet range of my moisture meter, and it's scanning right through the siding. Now here, another 62. Let's pause it. Look, as I just move it slightly, we're already up to 82, very high numbers. And as I go down, the numbers drop. Oops. Well, as I go down, the numbers drop. It went down to like a 23. And then I went a few courses down and eventually the number went down to 0. So it's telling me there's a lot of moisture behind the siding. And let's look at yet another one. At this house, I already showed you this wood chimney chase. We had a lot of water coming in here. As I looked underneath the deck, look at those drip marks. This house is crying. What's it trying to tell us? The house is not happy. But if the drip marks started right below the ledger board for the deck, I'd say there's water leaking in behind the ledger board and it's coming back out. But because it's coming out after the first course of siding, we know that that water is behind the siding. This is a much more serious concern. So what do? Well, go inside the house, keep our fingers crossed that the basement's not finished. And it was not finished. Had a bunch of insulation at the rim joist. Get up there, pull the insulation back. We got a lot of rot at the rim area. I mean, so much you can see. I stuck my hand right behind it. That's a lot of damage. Another shot of the same thing. Another one with wood siding, thinking about the water lines. We've got all the water coming from peak to peak, all down in a single line, no gutters. The water shoots and it hits against the wall. This wall was saturated. This is one where before I even walked up to the door to ring the doorbell, I was just, spidey senses are going nuts. And I took my moisture meter out and I checked the wall before I even walked up to the front door. Went, oh, yep, it's soaked. Okay, confirmed. Put the moisture meter back in my tool pouch. Then I went to the door to introduce myself. Just so curious. Here's that same house. We're looking at the back of the house. We've got all of the water comes down. It hits this lower roof, comes down, and then it splashes right on the deck, right in front of that patio door. So that's another area I'm concerned about. So what does a patio door area look like? This is it. You see, you got this little deterioration in the corner here. And then I use my moisture meter, put it up against the siding, and you see it's in the red. Now, it's not 100% red. It's not like it's just pegging my meter, which might indicate that we've got flashing behind there. It's kind of in the mid-range. Tells me it's wet. And I can confirm there's a lot more moisture that I was able to find down in the basement. And it's all about taking a step back and thinking, where is water getting concentrated? I'm not digging on every little area of a house. I've said that a few times today, I think. Now, how about this house? If you're inspecting this, where are you going to focus your efforts? We've got this window here. I'm thinking about penetrations in the wall. I'd be concerned about this. There's hardly any coverage. But then this window, this window sees even more water. All of the water coming from here all the way down is going to hit this window. So I'd focus on this window first. And if there was a window down here, I'd focus on that one first. I'm always thinking about the lowest area. That's going to see the most water. So let's take a closer look at this window. Now, when we go inside, it doesn't get a whole lot easier than this. I mean, this is a complete home inspection layup. We've got a bunch of staining here. Now, that could be one of two things. It might be that the window is leaking. It might also simply be condensation staining. You don't want to confuse one for the other. Now, if it's in the summertime and I'm using a moisture meter on there and I find moisture, well, it's a leak. If it's wintertime and I'm using my moisture meter on there and find moisture, it's probably condensation. You're probably not going to get that lucky. It's probably going to be the opposite season and it's going to be dry when you scan it, but it tells you need to dig into this a little bit more. Maybe somebody already fixed it and they didn't replace the trim. Who knows? So maybe go back outside, take a closer look at the window, look at the flashing details. I'm encouraging you to take the time to check this stuff out up close. The way the vinyl siding works here is all the water comes down the vinyl, it hits behind the J channel, and then the water's got to come out and over the edge and down. That's the path water is supposed to follow. And if the J channel was proper, they'd have it going all the way out past the edge. They'd bend a little tab down, which would come over the top of this, but they didn't do that. And so they're relying on caulking right here to help keep water out. And as soon as caulk fails at that location, you're going to have water leaking into the wall. And that's what had happened here. And the fix is basically to reflash the window. And one sec, I see another question in the Q&A. Oh, wait, not a question. Okay. Continuing on, another vinyl siding house. Now, I didn't mention it at the beginning of this class, but I do a blog. I've been doing a home inspection blog for, man, I think it's 14 years now, 15 years. It's been a long time. Every week, new blog post. And just a week or two ago, I did a blog post about how we diagnose water intrusion on vinyl sided houses. And it was a very abbreviated version of a lot of the stuff that I'm covering in this class. You can find it on my website. It's you type in my name, type in Reuben Saltzman blog or Reuben's blog or Structure Tech, you'll find it. But I talked about this case. This was actually my neighbor's house. And he said, Reuben, I've got this stuff that keeps showing up below one of my windows. I'm pretty sure I got an insect problem. I'm looking for an insect guy. Who you got? And I said, well, let's take a look at it. So I came over and I saw this little black stuff showing up below a window. And I gave the wall a little bang, a bunch more black stuff came out. And I said, I don't think you got an insect problem. I think your wall is falling apart. Let's take a look outside. So go outside. This is the house. You've got two roof surfaces funneling into a single valley. It all comes down, it hits this lower roof surface. And then from there, it goes right up against the window. So what's going on here? You got water leaking in at the window. This couldn't be any more obvious. Here's another shot of it. There was no kickout flashing. Now, I told you earlier when I was showing you that picture of kickout flashing, I ended up adding this on here. But the next step was I said, okay, we got all this water coming into one area. Let's see what it looks like below. And we went right to the siding on the side of the window, right below this area. And I just gave it a little push with my palm. And it's just imagine how vinyl siding would feel if there was no sheathing. If you had a stud and I pushed right in between, it gave like crazy, like there was nothing at all there. And I said, I think there's nothing at all there. I think that's your problem. And I ended up trying to use my moisture meter. And I bring this up because I love this photo. Do you see this sheathing that he's got on his house? There's a few houses out there that have got sheathing with this foil covering on it. And I don't know what that foil is supposed to do. Maybe it's supposed to protect the sheathing or something, or maybe act like a radiant barrier. I don't know what it's supposed to do, but I will tell you, it measures 100 on your moisture meter. If you try using your moisture meter on vinyl siding that's got this stuff behind it, it's all going to say 100. We ended up doing a moisture inspection on a home where a home inspector had reported all of the walls were saturated because he didn't know about this stuff. So when you see some crazy reading that your moisture meter is giving you, don't believe it. It's probably a false positive. But point is, we ended up doing a lot of pushing on the wall. We ended up pulling some of the vinyl siding back to take a look, confirmed what we suspected. There's a lot of water damage going on below it. Here's what it looks like. The good news is that he was able to hire a contractor to come out. Contractor removed all of the vinyl siding on the front of the house there, ended up taking the window out. See more problems. Ended up taking the window out, removed all the insulation, replaced some of the drywall, replaced the rotted studs, replaced a big section of the rim board. You can see the new rim board in here. And this was just one guy doing it. It took him 3 days. He took it all the siding off, replaced all the rotted stuff, put it all back together, used the same siding. He salvaged all the siding, he didn't break it. And he put the exact same siding back on the house. It all matched, and you'd never even know it today. So it was 3 days of labor. Whatever he charged him for that, it was probably like $2,000 a day in labor and then some extra parts. All said and done, the whole project was well under $10,000. Not what you want, but still, if this had been stucco, you would have had a crew spending the first several days swarming the house with saws and scaffolding just to get started, just to expose all the damage. And the damage would have shown up way earlier because stucco tends to trap water inside the wall, whereas with vinyl, the wall dries out a lot faster. And this was 17 years worth of damage. If this had been stucco, this would be more like 5 to 6 years worth of damage with a stucco home. It happens way faster. But my point is, there's no type of siding that's immune to water intrusion. Vinyl is probably the most resilient. It's the most breathable. It's simply a rain screen. Water is always going to get behind vinyl siding. That's by design. It's not a problem. It's just a matter of making sure that water drains back out. But when it doesn't drain out well enough, or you have too much coming in, that's where vinyl siding can fail. So all types of siding can experience these problems. All right, I've got a fairly long question. Brad, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to come back to your question, and I'll try to answer it at the end because that's a long one that I don't want to take the time to read right now. Sorry, it'll throw me off my flow, and everyone's going to have to stop and watch me read. All right, got another vinyl siding case. Let's take a look at the back of this house. So you're the home inspector. Where are you going to focus your efforts? Take a quick second to think about it. For me, I thought about this window. There's no protection here. Oh, this window, maybe even worse. There's no protection here. These got a little protection because we got a gutter here. Little protection. This one probably has the most exposure. There's a lot of areas where I was kind of concerned about water. So I went to a bunch of these windows, took my moisture meter, and I scanned the vinyl siding below the windows, looking for signs of water. Never found anything. And eventually kind of called it good. I think the only window I really didn't check was this one. And then go inside the house, do the home inspection. Well, here's this window inside the house. This is what it looks like. So it's the master bathroom. We've got a tub, we got a shower. It sees the most water. The window has fogged glass. I'll talk about that a little bit later here. It's got fogged glass. So it doesn't look very good. You've got all this condensation in between the panes of glass. You've also got condensation staining below the window. Now that's to be expected. It's a master bathroom. It gets really cold here in Minnesota. So you get all this condensation, but all that was kind of a red herring. It was throwing me off a little bit because there's more than just condensation staining here. There's also some other staining in the corner that surely wasn't caused by condensation. At least I don't think it was caused by condensation. I was thinking there's more than one thing happening here. We got a failed seal. We got condensation staining. I think this window's leaking too. So ended up going back outside the house, took my ladder back outside, set it up on the deck, went up on here and started pushing on the sheathing and using my moisture meter. And I'll let this video speak for itself. And oh no, let me pause. You see how I pulled the siding apart? We do that with vinyl siding all the time. That is not intrusive as long as you're not breaking anything. As long as you can snap that vinyl siding back together, we do that all day long. I love pulling vinyl siding apart and pushing on the sheathing. Snap it back together when I'm done, we're good. So I'm pushing on the sheathing and look at this. Does that not look like I'm pushing on a pillow? This is just mush. That sheathing is totally gone behind there. I mean, the rusted staples, that's a good indication too, but super mushy behind there. So we'll pull vinyl siding apart and push on it all day long. And now here's just one more. This is the most dramatic one. This house, this had so many issues, but we've got water coming down a valley, hitting the backside of brick. How could this possibly turn out? Of course, there's tons of water leaking into the wall there. Look at the design of this. We've got a butterfly roof and it's coming down. It's coming right into the side of the brick. And then what does the backside of the house look like? We've got a deck where a ton of water is concentrated, super heavily stained. Again, your home inspector's spidey senses should be going nuts. This is one of the worst houses I think I'd ever seen. This house was in foreclosure, and I got way more aggressive on this house than I would ever do again today. But I was just in the moment, and I had to make a video. So I got up there, I peeled the vinyl siding back. I mean, you see, look, I don't even need tools to do it. Now, again, I don't recommend you do this. I would never do it again, but I was feeling bold this day. So I took my utility knife and I made a little slit because I wanted to see exactly what that sheathing looked like. I didn't want to just see some soft sheathing. I wanted to see mush. And that's exactly what we got here. We got just mush. So there's your definitive evidence today. And none of you saw this. Don't tell anyone I did this. But today I would surely peel the siding back, just push on it. I'd take a video of that and I would put that video in my inspection report. Now, one of the things we do at my company is we do a lot of moisture testing, not just on stucco, but we'll do moisture testing on vinyl sided houses. This was an entire townhome community where we were doing moisture testing. And it's because I did one single home inspection. I found a lot of water intrusion at a bunch of different areas. It got back to the association. Our buildings are falling apart. And we ended up going around and doing it at the whole association. And here's what it looks like. It's a matter of you've kind of pieced it all together by now, I'm sure, by all these different methodologies I've shown you. And this is not intrusive testing. We can do this on any home. The seller doesn't need to sign a permission slip saying you can drill holes in my house. We're not drilling any holes. We're not doing anything that goes outside of what's permissible for a standard home inspection. So we're starting out with our scanning moisture meter. That's Antonio. He's scanning the vinyl siding. He moves it across the vinyl and he looks for elevated moisture levels. And it's all about comparing what he's got here to a known dry area. And if it's registering a 20 and a dry area registers a 5, we've got a problem. So he's pulling the vinyl siding apart. He's actually using a zip tool. It's a vinyl siding tool that makes it easier to pop the siding apart. If you're doing this all day, it's a good idea to have one of those. It's going to save your fingertips. Your fingers get they get pretty sore if you're doing it all day, but it makes it a little easier to pull it apart and put it back together. As you can see, we got a good view of the sheathing. They used a water resistant barrier. They got Tyvek, but they didn't Tyvek the entire home. And if you're going to do Tyvek like this, you might as well not do it at all. It's not doing a thing. It's taking all that water and it's dumping it right down to the deck. So we pulled the vinyl siding back here, and then we used the moisture meter and he stuck the pin probes in. And look at that. We're in the red. I can't quite read what the digital readout means, but it doesn't matter. We have definitive proof that our sheathing is saturated. We got water intrusion going on here. We mark that in our report. And when we type up our reports, we've got faraway photos of entire walls. And then we mark up all of the moisture content of the sheathing in all the different areas that we checked. And I'll show you an example of that at the end. And I will say, HomeGauge software makes it very easy to write these reports. I love the photo markup feature in HomeGauge. And just a couple other things, because I'm really talking up vinyl. I'm talking about how durable it is and how well it works. I do love vinyl siding. The a couple of complaints that people have about vinyl siding. One is that it's more prone to hail damage. That's true. I love this photo because someone fixed their hail damage with duct tape. That's right. They duct taped all of the hail holes in their siding, but only as high as their ladder would reach. They couldn't get all of these holes in their siding. I love that. These jokes go over much better to a live audience. I don't know if anybody's actually watching. And then the other thing that happens with vinyl is that it melts. You can have melted vinyl siding, and it could melt if you have your grill too close to the siding. If you've got a big melted patch of siding about yay high and it's on a patio or a deck, someone surely had the grill too close. But the other reason vinyl siding melts is reflected sunlight. And this is kind of a newer phenomenon. We started seeing this show up maybe within the last 10, 15 years. And you need a few things happening at the same time for this to occur. You need a window that's about 20 to 30 feet away. The window needs to have a low E coating. It means low emissivity. It means not a lot of energy is going to come through the window. It's going to reflect most of its energy back out. It's kind of like a mirror type of coating when it comes to energy. So you got this low E coating, and you need to have a window with a condition called collapsed glass. It's a special subset of a failed seal. It's technically a failed seal, but it's failed so mildly that it allows it means that the gases in between the two panes of glass can escape out, but it doesn't allow air to enter back in. So you don't actually end up with any condensation between the two panes of glass. You don't end up with any fogging, but you do still have a failed seal. And it means that during cold weather, those panes of glass suck in towards each other to the point where they're almost touching. We've got an example of that in our office. This is one of those window panes. And there's my dad, and he's got his fingers. It feels like his fingers are touching each other. This glass is sucked in so much in the middle. And by the way, if you're using an infrared camera during your home inspections, you can pick this out very easily. You can see we've got 4 panes here with failed seals where the glass is sucked in the middle. And then we've got 2 panes that are still intact. It shows up pretty easily with an infrared camera, assuming you have a good difference in inside and outside temperature. But what ends up happening then is that you've got this window with a curved piece of glass, the sun hits it, and the reflection, once it's about 20 to 30 feet away, is very concentrated. It gets very hot, and it gets so hot that it'll actually melt vinyl siding. And this is an example of what it looks like. This is a great example because at this house, we've got the neighbor's home is reflecting onto this house. It ends up with these 4-pointed star reflections, and it just warps the heck out of the vinyl all over the place. But what makes this so great is that this house actually has windows with the same condition. These windows have collapsed glass. This first window, look at the reflection on the vinyl siding. Looks good, nice and straight. Now we start to see a curve, more curve, even more curve. So these windows have the same condition. That's why this photo is the greatest photo ever taken to illustrate this defect. Okay, that was a little trip down a side road back to water intrusion. And wait a minute, hold on. I see another question here. This question says, when inspecting stucco siding, what are your thoughts when you don't visibly see flashing around windows and doors? It's a concern. It's one of many things that we add to a list of reasons why we're concerned about water intrusion. I'm concerned about water intrusion on certain ages of homes, even when I see everything done perfect. But let me get into a little bit about stone veneer. And by the time I'm done with all of these visible things that I see wrong with stone veneer, I think your answer will be very clear, Brad. And okay. And I have someone else saying there are people watching. That's wonderful. Okay, good. All right. So moving on to stone and stucco. Why have there been so many problems with stucco? There's a great article by Joe Stiebrick. And yes, that's how you're supposed to pronounce his name. It starts with an L. The L is silent. Joe Stiebrick. I consider this guy the godfather of building science. He thinks that's funny, but he's written a lot about stucco, and there's one of the best articles is called Stucco Woes, the Perfect Storm. You can find this at the Building Science Corporation website, or you just Google BSI 029, you'll find it. I'm not going to get into all the details of it, but he says, should we blame designers for complicated building syndrome? Should we blame stucco people for this? Should we blame window manufacturers? Should we blame this, that? And the whole point of this is we can't just blame one person. It was a lot of stuff that changed very quickly in a short amount of time, all at once. And that's why we're having so many problems with stucco all over the country. Maybe not in some really dry climates, but just about everywhere else, we're having a lot of issues with stucco. So I'm not just pointing to one thing. I'm saying it's a lot of stuff that went wrong all at once. And we find a lot of issues with stucco. If you see stains like this below windows and suspect areas, it's a good yellow flag. I'd call it a yellow flag. It doesn't mean that you have water leaking into the wall, but it means that you're concerned about it. But just because you don't have this doesn't mean anything. A lot of the time you can have a rotting wall and you don't see any signs of it. So what do you do when you come across homes like this? Well, let's talk about stone veneer too, and then we'll make our conclusion about stucco and stone houses. And when I say stone veneer, there's a lot of names for it. It's really the new stucco. A few names would be faux stone or adhered manufactured stone veneer, AMSV. That's probably the best technically correct name, is to say AMSV. Some people might call it concrete masonry veneer. Some people might just say stick on stone. People who install the stuff like to call it stick on stone. Some very good descriptive terms that Joe Stiebrick came up with, pretty sure it was him, would be lumpy stucco or stucco with funnels. Those are good, accurate, descriptive terms for it. And this is what I'm talking about. This is an example of stone veneer. It is a big sponge on the side of your house. This behaves exactly like stucco does. Now, remember, I told you water's going to get behind vinyl. Vinyl is a rain screen. That's all it is. And water drains back out. Well, with stone veneer or stucco, these are sidings called reservoir claddings. Reservoir claddings. It means that they will hold water. They are designed to hold water. It's not a defect. It's not a problem. This is by design. They hold water. Water is going to go through it. And we just need to make sure we've got a path for that water to get back out. We need to make sure that it's going to dry and it doesn't stay inside the wall. It doesn't find holes where it's going to cause damage to the sheathing. It should never reach the sheathing. So how much of a sponge is this material? Well, here's a quick example. I'm taking a little bottle of water, and I'm going to pour it against that siding on a warm day. It's 80 degrees. It's not hot. It's just warm outside. So take it on there, and I'm going to pour it, and I'm pouring it kind of slowly. I don't want to just dump it down, but 2/3 of a bottle is what I got left here. And that water never actually reaches the bottom of the wall. This is as far down as it went. All the rest of the water just sucked. Every time it hit a mortar joint, it sucked right in. That's not a defect. That's how it's designed. So why is stone the same thing as stucco? Because it behaves exactly the same. It just has a different look on the outside. You're going to have your sheathing. You're going to have some type of water resistant barrier like tar paper. You're going to have metal lath. You're going to have a scratch coat of mortar. Now, so far, you don't know what I'm describing. I could be describing stucco. It could be stone veneer. If it's stucco, we're going to have a couple more layers of mortar. And then if it's stone veneer, we're going to back butter those stones. Well, there's different ways to do it. Probably they're going to back butter those stones and stick them on the wall. That's why they call them lick 'em, stick 'em siding. And it behaves the exact same way that stucco does. Water's going to get in there. And then what happens if water can't get back out? We have a big rotted mess. This is a good article. This is written almost 10 years ago now, asking to stick on stone worse than eaves. We remember all the problems with eaves. Another great article in the Journal of Light Construction talking about the number of problems that we're dealing with. This is a guy out of Iowa, the number of problems that he's dealing with stone veneer homes. And we find this to be very true with all the moisture testing we're doing. If you're going to be inspecting any houses in your area that have stone veneer, I strongly recommend you get a copy of the National Concrete Masonry Association's installation manual. It's free. It's the current edition is the 5th edition. I think that's on my screen here. Yeah, 5th edition, 4th printing. If you Google it, you will find this. It's a big long PDF, chock full of installation diagrams. And as far as I'm concerned, this is the Bible on how to install stone veneer. These are the rules. And it's essentially code. It's not technically incorporated into the building code, but the manufacturers, the Masonry Veneer Manufacturers Association became part of the Concrete Masonry Association. They're the ones who came up with the ASTM standards showing how the stuff is supposed to be installed. And then those ASTM standards and the TMS standards ended up getting adopted by the building code. So the building code says you need to follow this standard. Well, the standard mirrors exactly what's in this diagram that I just showed you, or in this installation manual. So if it's in this manual, that's how you're supposed to do it. This mirrors exactly what it says in the code. So as far as I'm concerned, this is what you need to go by as a home inspector. Follow this. And here's the actual code section. This is what the current IRC says about how to install adhered masonry veneer. So back to what we're actually looking at. That was just a little detour on the importance of this document and how it carries weight. Let's look at a few examples. I took some of the installation diagrams they had in that diagram or in that manual. Getting my words flustered. I need more water. I took some of the illustrations in the manual and I marked them up to suit my needs as a home inspector. They've got all this different stuff labeled. It's all the stuff that I don't care about. Really what I care about here is we've got an outside faucet. Did we embed it in sealant or did we do something different? This is an example of something different. This is not embedded in sealant. This is embedded in mortar. This is a totally wrong installation. Now, remember I told you water's going to go right through the mortar. What keeps it from getting back inside the wall? How do you flash around this? There's no good way to do that. And what happens when your faucet freezes and it bursts or your faucet needs to be replaced? How's your plumber supposed to replace it? We've got to think about future service. Totally improper installation. It's supposed to be flush with the surface of the wall. Here's another example. Same thing. We've got a dryer terminal. It's supposed to be a bed of sealant in the exterior flange. And this is the opposite of that. We've got mortar coming up against the sides. There's no way to seal it off at the edges. And what happens when some kid kicks a soccer ball against it and breaks the dryer terminal? How do you replace it? I don't know. You got to start tearing out your siding. Another example of what the manufacturers show, they say that when you've got the siding coming down to the roof surface, they want a 2-inch gap between the siding and the roof so that you can have a weep screed installed. Now, a weep screed in home inspection language, I'd say a good descriptive term for a weep screed is a wall drain. It's just something that is there to allow water to drain back out of the wall. So they want a 2-inch gap there so water can drain out and also to make sure that water doesn't wick back up into the wall because remember, it acts like a sponge. This is what's required. This is not a good example of that being done. This is a new construction home. This is brand new. And this is how they did it. They brought the mortar right tight down to the shingles. What's going to happen? Water is going to soak right up into that stone veneer. Another fantastic example of how not to do it. We're supposed to have a 2-inch gap here. Oh, and where's our flashing? We don't have any flashing. Now, I'm reminding you, I'm just powering through a few examples of stuff that I see on the outside, on the surface level. That's egregiously wrong. Here, you're supposed to have the siding coming down to it. Well, if you've got soil or dirt or grass or something like that, you need 4 inches of clearance. Now, if it's a hard surface like concrete, you can go down to 2 inches. If it's frost protected, like it's connected to the house and it's a hard surface, you can actually reduce that down to 1 inch. You can get it fairly close, but in no condition can you do something like this, where you actually take the siding and you bury it into the dirt. Remember, it acts like a sponge, and we need a way for water to drain out after it gets into the wall. We're not providing a way for water to drain out here. We're not providing a way for water to drain out here either. There's no weep screed here. There's no way for water to get out. If you have vertical transitions, if you've got stone veneer and then you've got, say, a window, how do you seal that gap? You need to caulk it. You need to start with backer rod. You need a big, thick bead of caulk. You can't just bring them right to each other and then caulk over that. There needs to be a gap between these materials. So a backer rod, a foam rod, can be shoved into that vertical transition, and then caulk is used to bridge that gap. So the caulk is only touching two surfaces. It's touching the mortar on one side and the window on the other. It's not touching the back as well. That's a good way to do it. This is not how to do it. This is where they brought the mortar right to the edge of the wood casing. These materials are going to expand and contract at different rates. Water is going to get in. This is going to surely leak. That is not the proper detail. This is an example of it, an attempt at it. It's not as thick as it should be. They actually used a metal casing bead here. And then there's a little bit of caulk, maybe a 1/4 inch gap. It's supposed to be a 3/8 inch gap. Whatever. I'm not going to get that picky. They left a gap. They filled it with caulk. I'm super happy about that. That's a nice detail. Here's another good detail. Look, they left a gap. They filled it in with caulk. We should be happy about this. Skip. Okay. So my point here is that we've got all these different things right on the surface. And I put all those illustrations right in my home inspection reports. I say, here's what the manufacturer says you need to do. Here's what they did. Here's what they said they need to do. Here's what they did. And we build a case here. And in the end, if I'm not seeing any signs of water intrusion, and I usually don't when it comes to stucco and stone veneer, because that moisture meter I showed you, it's mostly worthless. You can't go scanning through stucco because you got metal lath behind it. And it's always going to read 100% when you got metal lath. So how do I prove it? I usually can't. And I usually end up saying it's a good idea to have intrusive moisture testing done because of this and this and this and this, and you have the potential for concealed damage. I add it all up, but every house is different. If there's a house with a little feature that goes 3 feet high with some stone veneer at the front of the house, and you got these big overhangs and you've got gutters and there's no water splashing against the house, even if they totally botched the installation on the stone siding, I'm probably not going to make that big of a deal about it because water doesn't get concentrated. It's not going to get saturated. And I can go, well, this isn't right. That's not right. That's not right. But it's probably going to be okay. And I'll let it go. On the other hand, if it's that same house and you've got a gable end wall and maybe the siding goes all the way up and it sees a lot of water, my recommendation is going to be totally different. It's a matter of looking at the big picture, not just looking at one little detail and saying, therefore, my recommendation as a home inspector needs to be this. It's put it all together. So what happens if you do end up recommending intrusive testing? Before we go there, I want to show you one other little trick. I said I was going to come back to using deep wall probes. Something you can do if you have a Survey Master moisture meter and you've invested in deep wall probes, there's one other thing you can do. At this house, it had stone veneer and it had brick siding, and I was sure there was water coming in. I saw a lot of little details like around the windows, saw some little cracks, saw some gaps here, and I thought, I think there's water coming in. And I wanted some type of proof. And I learned this from another guy on my team where I found an outlet inside the house that was fairly close to the window. So I took the cover plate off the outlet and I took my deep wall probes. I'm skipping ahead here just for time's sake. I take my deep wall probes and I plug them into the side of my Survey Master moisture meter. And no, I don't work for them. I'm not selling any of this. I just like them. Now, look at this. I'm going to put them against my palm and I'll pause it there. You see what happens to the moisture reading? It goes way up into the red when I touch my palm. I got sweaty palms probably. That's what it's reading here. And then I'm going to take those deep wall probes and I stick them into the side of the outlet. And so we're going right in between the outlet and the wall. Now look at what's happening with the moisture level on my moisture meter. It's going way up. And as I keep pushing them into the wall, the level keeps increasing. I'm just skipping ahead in the video here. We don't need to see the whole thing, but that's a super cool test you can do if you have no other way of proving that there's water intrusion. Take your deep wall probes and do this. If you've got probes that have sharp pointy ends, don't do this. I heard from a home inspector who did a test like this, and he was trying to jab it in there, and he ended up hitting the Romex and just about started a fire. Like he shorted out a circuit, had to pay to have an electrician come in and fix it. I would not do that by holding each one of these probes and gently pushing them with my fingers as I'm doing in this video. I'm not going to push through any wires. So I'm perfectly comfortable doing it like this. And then when I'm done, I'll put the cover plate back on, and I have definitive proof that we've got water inside the wall without even having moisture testing done. And this is how I can justify my recommendation for moisture testing. Here's one more house, similar example, brick siding. We had some details around the windows. I'm concerned about water coming in here. Look at this drip mark on the outlet. If that's not a telltale sign, not only that, I took the cover plate off the outlet, stuck my probes in there. It's reading a 92. I don't know why my red light isn't red here, but it's reading 92, super high moisture level. It's a cool trick you can do. The only downside is that these deep wall probes, it's two little sticks of metal connected to wires. You know how much they want for these? I don't know what they want, but 10 years ago, it was about 90 bucks. The price is probably double today. It's hideously expensive for what you're getting, but there's no alternative. They're very effective. All right. So what else can be done? If you're actually going to have a professional come out and test a stucco home, you could have somebody come out and cut big old holes in the wall. That's going to go over like a lead balloon. No seller is ever going to let you do that. I've heard of people using these boroscopes, these proctologist tools on a wall to look for damage. This doesn't work on an exterior wall because they're insulated. There's nothing to see. Infrared, what about using an infrared camera? When these were the greatest, coolest thing back in, I don't know, 2004, 2005, they were really new. And we thought, great, this is going to be the newest thing to replace intrusive testing. And turns out it's not. They are unreliable at finding water intrusion in outside walls. I'm not going to get into all the specifics of why this is. I've heard that home inspectors in Florida have really good results doing it, because in Florida, they apparently build with, like, they have concrete walls. They've got stucco over concrete, and you have a lot more, you have a lot more thermal mass, and it seems to work really well for those guys. But here in Minnesota, it does not work. And in most of the country, it doesn't work. You're going to have a lot of false positives, and you're going to miss a lot of areas that are wet where it's telling you that the wall is not, because all an infrared camera is going to measure is temperature. And if you don't have a wall that is evaporating moisture, it's giving up heat, you're not going to have any difference in temperature, and you're going to miss a ton of wet areas. And you know, there was one company in my area who was offering this. They were an intrusive moisture testing company, and this is before we got into it. And I said, why are you using an infrared camera? Because now that I've done all my research, I think I've learned that it's not reliable at finding water intrusion. And he said, well, sometimes you just need something to convince people to have intrusive testing. And this way we end up charging for infrared, and then we charge for intrusive moisture testing. And really what we're doing is we're looking for thermal anomalies. And that's going to be enough to justify our recommendation for intrusive moisture testing. And he said, Reuben, I always find thermal anomalies. So he basically tells me he's scamming people. He's using his infrared camera to always find the same results to justify a second fee. But he doesn't ever rely on the results that he gets with his infrared camera. So that's what I have to say about using an infrared camera to find moisture on outside walls. Sometimes, like in these photos I'm showing you, sometimes you can get lucky. I'm not saying it's completely worthless, but I'm saying it's not a substitute for intrusive testing. It's guesswork. That's about all it is. Okay. And now I do want to mention there's one other type of testing. My big focus is on exterior testing. I'm teaching about that. There is interior testing too. And that's where holes are made in drywall and you test in all these areas, but it's not nearly as reliable. It's not nearly as thorough. There's a lot of areas that can't be tested. These are a couple of windows that would be super suspicious. I mean, you got this bay window that sticks out from the house. I definitely want to test that. But when it's all tile and grout, there's nowhere you can stick an interior probe. So this window just simply couldn't be tested if you're relying on interior moisture testing. And that's why just about everything we do is exterior testing. I've got Antonio explaining the process here. The audio just doesn't work very well when we're doing this. It doesn't sync well. So I'll show you a video. It consists of drilling 3/16-inch holes in pairs in all the areas where we're concerned about, and then taking a hammer probe, sticking it into those holes and taking a moisture reading, and then taking caulk of a matching color and then filling those holes everywhere in the stucco. And the process is exactly the same if we're testing stone veneer. We just test in the mortar joints. So that's stucco testing in a nutshell. And sometimes we'll be doing stucco testing and we don't even get to take a reading because there's nothing behind the stucco. Watch Wayne as he's using his hammer drill to drill some holes in the wall here. Do you see what just happened with his drill? I'm going to rewind it in case you missed it. Watch this. Watch what happens. Oh, I didn't rewind it. There. His drill went all the way in. He buried it to the hilt. It's because there was no sheathing behind the stucco. So in that case, we get a big red X in our report saying we couldn't take a reading. The sheathing is gone. So that is what moisture testing looks like in a nutshell. So I've got a question here I said I'd come back to. Brad said, when you're inspecting stucco siding, what are your thoughts when you don't visibly see flashing around windows and doors? It's just one more piece of evidence, one other thing that might lead us down the path to recommend intrusive testing. If there's no flashing above a window and there's a big old overhang and the window is surely never going to get wet, no big deal. I don't make a big thing about that. All right, let me see what other questions we have. Can we see the first image again? The one with the exterior faucet, the drawing from the book. If anyone wants any of these images, I'm not going to go back, but if anyone wants any of these, I've got my PDF and you can type in that link. It's in the chat, or you can go to that link in the chat and you can download this entire presentation. And let's see. Okay. That is it for the questions so far. I'm caught up. I got it. Oh my goodness. I've got 7 minutes left. All right. Here's what the drilled holes look like in the stucco. Here's what it looks like when the holes are filled. It's inconspicuous. It's not like this stuff sticks out. Drilled holes, filled holes. And then here's what our report looks like. Take a look at this house. Look at this black staining. If that isn't just screaming at you from the road, I don't know what would. But so we'll take a picture of the house and then we'll put that in our report. And then we document all of the areas where we drilled holes and we tested the sheathing. And this is what this house looked like. The areas in white, we had an acceptable moisture reading. In the orange, we say 16 to 19%. And here we do report the exact numbers. We use the fancier moisture meter for this, the Delmhorst, where we actually program in the wood type and all that to get exact numbers. The areas where the X's are, there was no sheathing. We couldn't take a reading. The areas where it's a red number, it means that's high. You got the potential for mold growth, for rot, deterioration. This wall needs to be opened up and fixed. And then on the other side, it all looked fine. No concerns on the other side of the wall. Here's another example. We're doing moisture testing on, I think this is wood siding, pretty sure that's wood. And we found lots of high moisture levels in a lot of areas, big areas where there was no sheathing at all. And then finally, just a fun little story. This house, we found moisture in a lot of different areas. And here's a page out of our report all around the chimney. The cellar really wanted to fight us on this. They didn't want to admit that their house had any problems. They were a builder, and they ended up saying, no, it's fine. You guys, when was the last time you calibrated your equipment? I want to see calibration records. You show me that, or we're not doing anything. And it was a lot of back and forth. And we ended up meeting the seller at the house and the buyers and the listing agent and the buyer's agent. My moisture technician came out. I came out as the owner of the company. It was a big old party, all of us there. And the seller was supposed to have removed a 1 foot by 1 foot section to prove that these areas where we said there's no sheathing, he wanted to prove that it's all there and that our moisture equipment was defective. So come out there and here's the area. Here's the 1 foot section where he was supposed to open it up. He ended up removing one stone instead. And we took another test. We stuck our probes in there, and you can barely see on Antonio's moisture meter here. It's showing 41%. I mean, this wall is wet. And here's a closer look at it. Here's the metal lath. He couldn't even cut through the metal lath. And then we get a little closer. He's like, look, that wood, it's solid. He's like poking on it. There's nothing wrong here. So Antonio takes his finger, he sticks it in behind the metal lath, and he wipes out a big scoop of the sheathing, which is just mush. And he goes, this is the sheathing. That's your stud. And the guy stormed off inside. that was the end of that. And he had some serious repairs to do on that house. That was just a fun win to share on one of the few ones where I actually had to show up at a house. But if you're going to be making a recommendation for someone to come out and do intrusive testing, my recommendation would be look for someone who is certified by EDI, the Exterior Design Institute. Again, I have no affiliation with this company. I'm not an officer. I don't teach for them. I've got nothing to do with them, but this is the company we use to train the moisture technicians on my team, along with interior training. They train each other too, but this is the certification that we hang our hat on. So if you're going to be recommending intrusive testing for someone in your area, go to their website, EDI, and they've got a search feature where you can find home inspectors. I shouldn't say home inspectors, where you can find inspectors who are certified in your area to do this type of testing. And with that, I'm going to show the link one more time. If you want a copy of this presentation, you go to bit.ly/H20, those are zeros, probs 2022. It's all lowercase. You go there, you can get a copy of this presentation. You can boost, you can do screenshots of any of my illustrations, diagrams, any of that stuff. Or if you go to my blog, you go to Structure Tech, you can find my blog. I've got all of those illustrations in one of my blog posts, and you can download them in the original higher quality format too. And just a plug for us too. We do a podcast for home inspectors. We got a YouTube channel, all that other fun stuff. We are an education company. We're home inspectors, but we love educating people. So, and I see I've got maybe one or two more questions in the chat. This question said, when I say no sheathing at all, is it because it's rotted out? Thank you, Marianne. Good question. Yes, the reason there is no sheathing was because it was rotted out. There was sheathing there at some point, but it has just rotted away to nothing. Yeah. And then, okay, any more questions? I don't see any more questions. I think I answered them all. Oh, wait, there was a question. I said I'd come back to it at the end. Brad said, sorry, I got to read it. It's a paragraph here. He's got a question about stucco and flashing. What about if we don't visibly see flashing around windows and doors? In other words, in his area, builders are using a tape flashing behind the stucco, which is applied before the stucco system and not visible on the outside. It's too complicated. I need to think that through. I'm sorry, I'm not smart enough to answer that question on the fly. I will say if I don't see flashing coming out over the top of a window, that's an improper installation. There's no way you could have flashing that's completely concealed. That the whole idea here, if you think about a wall sandwich, Now, I said water is going to get behind the stucco. It will always get behind the stucco, and you need a way for that water to drain out. The water gets through the stucco. It hits your water resistant barrier. It's going to drain down. By the time it hits this first penetration window, it needs to drain over. And if you don't see flashing coming out of the wall, I'd call that an improper installation. And it's noon. I'm sorry, I went right up to time, Dax.
Reuben, you nailed it.
I can't hear you.
Absolutely phenomenal presentation. The feedback back to the team has been amazing throughout your 2 hours of doing it. The entire HomeGauge team as well was tuned in. Many of us are not licensed home inspectors, and we're still enthralled by what you're talking about. I have a quick question for you myself. I live in a part of Denver, Colorado, where our entire community didn't exist 15 years ago. It was the old airport, for those of you that know the area. We see new construction going up here at an incredible rate. And of course, in Colorado, we have extreme heat in the summer and we have extreme cold in the winter with a lot of snow and a lot of rain. Particularly during COVID, construction began on many, many properties, single family homes and condo buildings, and was left out in the sun, in the snow throughout the winter, particularly while supplies were an issue. When you turn up to do an inspection and these moisture issues are on your mind, are you doing anything different when you know these new constructions have been out and exposed to the elements for long periods of time before they were waterproofed and finished?
No, unfortunately, all I can do is speculate, and you know, it turns into conjecture and saying, well, this could have been sitting out for a long time before it was finished. That's all I can do. And we know that most builders don't give houses enough time to dry out. In a perfect world, a builder is going to put a house together. They're going to put the roof on. They're going to put the Tyvek over the outside wall so we can still breathe a lot. And then they're going to put in a bunch of commercial dehumidifiers and run the heck out of those to dry everything out, because it's assumed that your building materials are going to get saturated at some point before the house is put together. And if it doesn't dry out right, you're going to get shrinking and cracking and movement and all this objectionable stuff. But most people just don't have the time to do that, and people end up living with it. And getting into that level of detail is way more than what I'm comfortable doing as a home inspector.
Okay, great to know. Thank you very much. Reuben, a real pleasure. The feedback that we will pass on to you from various people has been absolutely fantastic. I think one of the best presentations we've had through the 4 Together conferences we've done so far. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.